he made millions laugh. Night after night, he walked onto the stage with that familiar smile, the voice of comfort, humor, and stability in American homes. But behind that smile lived a man almost no one really knew. For 3 decades, Jay Leno carried a separate life, one kept carefully in the shadows, quiet, private, and far more meaningful than anything that ever aired on television. While the world saw the entertainer, backstage existed a different man entirely, shaped by discipline, sacrifice, and a sense of responsibility few ever recognized. And now, the people closest to him are finally revealing the truth about the choices he made, the life he built away from the cameras, and the secret that defined him far more than fame ever did. Once you learn what Jay Leno was hiding, the story of his career will never feel the same again. He lived beneath the studio lights like the world knew him, but the real Jay Leno existed somewhere else entirely. While millions saw the entertainer with the easy grin and sharp timing, few ever suspected that when the cameras shut off, Jay disappeared into a life built from steel, grease, gasoline, and silence. For 30 years, he balanced 2 identities, the beloved television host the world thought they understood, and the quiet craftsman who found peace under the hood of an engine. The truth of how those 2 lives remained intertwined, without anyone noticing, is a story far deeper than fame. Jay Leno was born in 1950 in New Rochelle, New York, into a family defined by modesty and work. His father, Angelo, an Italian-American insurance salesman, believed effort mattered more than talent. His mother, Catherine, a soft-spoken Scottish immigrant, taught patience and simplicity. His older brother, Patrick, served in Vietnam, returned with a sense of seriousness, and became a lawyer. The Leno household was not glamorous. It was practical, structured, and grounded. Jay grew up in Andover, Massachusetts, in a small house with an old garage that would quietly shape his future. That garage was Jay's first real classroom. He would take apart anything he could get his hands on, not to break things, but to understand them. Engines, gears, carburetors, he learned how the world worked by dismantling it. At the same time, he discovered something else that fueled him, making people laugh. He realized that laughter and mechanics had more in common than anyone would think. Both required timing, awareness, and the ability to understand how things fit together. After high school, Jay attended Emerson College in Boston, majoring in speech therapy, an education that sharpened his ability to speak, pace, and connect. In his dorm, he founded the school's first comedy club. And then the routine began: garage work during the day, stand-up at night. He would spend 8 hours covered in grease, then shower, grab a notebook, and step on stage under bar lights. He used to say, "In the shop, I fixed machines. On stage, I fixed moods." He didn't treat them as separate lives. One built discipline. The other built identity. In 1973, Jay made the move to Los Angeles, a city crowded with performers chasing the same dream. He rented a small apartment, worked days at a Burbank auto shop, and spent his nights grinding through comedy clubs. His income was small, but what set Jay apart was consistency. He saved every dollar, avoided luxury, and refused to rely on anyone but himself. After hundreds of late-night sets and 4 years of relentless effort, the moment arrived. On March 2, 1977, Jay stepped onto The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. His delivery was steady, clean, and natural, built from years of repetition, not luck. Carson noticed. Audiences noticed. Jay became a regular. Through the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, Jay slowly carved out a place in American entertainment. He wrote for television, acted in small roles, and appeared on talk shows. But what audiences loved was that he didn't feel like a celebrity. He felt like a working man who happened to be funny. His comedy was never mean. It wasn't inflated. It was a voice that sounded like someone you could talk to at a diner counter. As the 1980s progressed, Jay began filling in for Johnny Carson during absences. Producers admired him for something rare in Hollywood: reliability. He was never late. He never complained. He didn't unravel under pressure. He didn't create scandals. He worked. But what no one knew, not executives, not audiences, not even close friends, was that every night after filming, Jay quietly returned to his other life. While the world assumed he was enjoying fame, he was back in a garage with his sleeves rolled up, surrounded by the familiar smell of oil and metal, hands deep in an engine. It grounded him. It reminded him who he was before the lights, before the applause, before the spotlight. This was the double life. The public never saw it, but it was the truest part of Jay Leno. Off stage, Jay never left the world that shaped him. Long after the studio lights dimmed, he returned to his small Burbank garage, the same kind of place where his story began. He spent hours there, sometimes deep into the night, sleeves rolled up, engine parts scattered across the floor. He bought rusted cars no one wanted, restored them bolt by bolt, and sold them again. To most, it looked like a hobby. But to Jay, it was discipline. It was patience. It was how he kept himself grounded. "Fixing a car is like writing a joke," he once said. "You work on it until it runs." The grease on his hands reminded him of who he really was, even as the world around him began changing. From 1985 to 1988, Jay became a familiar face on weekend comedy shows. His rhythm was consistent, never dramatic, never desperate for attention. His presence felt natural, like someone who had simply earned his way into the room. By 1986, he was no longer just a rising comedian. NBC officially named him Johnny Carson's substitute host. Suddenly, Jay was standing inches from the seat that defined American late-night entertainment. The small garages and comedy clubs were behind him, and the brightest stage in television was ahead. But that opportunity came with a price. The world of late-night TV was a battlefield, silent, strategic, and unforgiving. The only thing that could keep him standing was the same discipline that once helped him rebuild engines. On May 25, 1992, Jay Leno walked onto The Tonight Show stage as Johnny Carson's successor. The moment marked the end of one era and the uncertain beginning of another. The Tonight Show aired live at 11:35 p.m., a nightly ritual for millions of Americans. Taking that chair meant carrying the weight of tradition and expectation. For the first 3 months, the pressure was immense. Carson's loyal audience was skeptical. Critics dismissed Jay as a temporary placeholder. Newspapers called NBC's decision a gamble that could backfire. Jay said nothing in response. He simply worked, every hour, every day, without letting doubt touch him. He averaged 18-hour workdays. Mornings were filled with production meetings. Afternoons were spent reviewing scripts. Evenings were for filming. And when most would have gone home, Jay drove to small clubs across Los Angeles to perform stand-up sets, keeping his timing sharp and his connection to real audiences alive. In 1994, at his father's memorial, he said, "It really is lonely at the top. You have no idea. But we'll fight the good fight, Pop." Behind the success, there was solitude. Success earned, but not without cost. By 1995, Jay Leno had done what most said was impossible. The Tonight Show reached over 5 million viewers a night, surpassing David Letterman's Late Show. NBC reported a rise in advertising revenue of more than 30%, making Jay the network's most valuable figure. But even in victory, his routine never changed. He continued performing around 150 stand-up shows a year, every airport, every small-town theater, every late-night flight. "If I'm off stage for more than a few days," he once said, "I start to miss the smell of the audience." It wasn't fame he was chasing. It was work. Work was the rhythm of his life. The late 1990s became the golden era of The Tonight Show. The special Cheers finale episode in 1993 drew over 22 million viewers. The 10th anniversary show in 2002 attracted nearly 12 million. NBC estimated weekly profits of more than 30 million. Behind the scenes, Jay remained the same man the crew had always known. No entourage, no ego, no shortcuts. He worked the way a craftsman works, not for applause, but because effort itself mattered. Even with the world watching, Jay Leno stayed the man who came home to a garage and a set of tools at the end of the night. He took only 2 days off after his mother's funeral in 1993. To co-workers, it seemed almost inhuman, an endless, unbreakable work ethic. But to Jay, it was simple. "I work, I sleep, then I work again. That's all," he said. That was his rhythm, the code that shaped his life. No indulgence, no pause, no luxury. Just discipline And that discipline carried him straight into one of the most complicated transitions in television history. By 2000, NBC was already planning for the future. They quietly announced that Conan O'Brien would take over The Tonight Show in 2009, 8 years before the change would happen. The early decision was meant to prevent conflict, but the whole industry knew there was no easy way to replace a host who defined late night for a generation. Jay accepted the announcement with his usual calm. "Every show needs a next chapter," he told reporters. No bitterness, no protest, just composure. On May 29, 2009, after 17 years, Jay hosted what the world believed would be his final episode. The studio was filled with friends, longtime crew members, and audience members who had grown older watching him every night. When the cameras rolled for the final time, he didn't give a dramatic goodbye. He simply said, "This has been the best job in the world." Then he walked away, quietly, humbly, exactly as he had lived. But television does not rest. And neither did Jay. NBC launched The Jay Leno Show in prime time just months later. What followed was a storm of confusion and conflict between Jay and Conan O'Brien, one of the most talked-about disputes in TV history. But before that chaos unfolded, Jay had already spent 20 years in the public eye. No, not for ego, but for consistency, reliability, and work. After the dust settled, Jay returned to The Tonight Show on March 1, 2010. The decision ended the controversy and restored the show's ratings. But by 2014, another chapter was ready to close. On February 6th, Jay handed the show to Jimmy Fallon and walked out of NBC for the final time. There were no grand speeches or emotional breakdowns, just a final nod and a quiet exit from the building that had defined his public life. And then, he disappeared into the world that had always been closest to his heart. A few months later, production began on Jay Leno's Garage, a project filmed not on polished stages but in the place where Jay had always been most himself, his workshop. Surrounded by steel, tools, engines, and the familiar scent of gasoline, Jay returned to the life that existed long before fame. The documentary special became a full series in 2015 and continued through 2022, blending mechanical restoration with conversations and road tests. Presidents, engineers, comedians, and innovators all visited him there. The garage became his sanctuary, his studio, his home. On the show, Jay often repeated one line, "Cars are the only thing that make me quiet." When the engine started, the world disappeared. The noise of fame, the chaos of networks, the pressure of ratings, all of it went still. His collection became the physical symbol of his second life. At Big Dog Garage, he owns more than 180 cars and 160 motorcycles, valued at over $50 million. Among them is a 1994 McLaren F1 worth over $20 million, 2 historic Doble steam cars once owned by Howard Hughes, and a 1909 Baker Electric that he gifted to his wife. Jay is also the only person alive who owns 3 functioning 1963 Chrysler turbine cars, machines so rare they are almost myths. Each vehicle tells a story. Each engine carries memory. It was his workshop, his refuge, his truth. And while the world knew Jay Leno as the man who made America laugh, the real Jay lived in that garage, quiet, focused, and surrounded by the sound of engines instead of applause. Every vehicle Jay owns carries more than a price tag. It carries history. In his garage, nothing is just displayed. Everything is restored, documented, tested, and driven. He insists on doing the work himself, recording technical notes with the care of an archivist and the patience of a craftsman. Journalists who have visited Big Dog Garage often describe it as a private museum where engineering becomes memory, where metal is preserved not for status, but for meaning. Alongside television, Jay has quietly written the Motormouth column for Popular Mechanics, chronicling steam engines, restored classics, experimental hybrids, and even jet-powered machines. His writing is simple and direct, not written to impress, but to explain. He talks like a man who has done the work, not one who just observes it. He has always valued experience over image, and while most entertainers slow down with age, Jay never changed his routine. He still performs close to 150 stand-up shows a year, traveling across the country, leaving one motel just to arrive at the next. People ask how he keeps going. He answers the same way every time. I fix cars by day. I perform by night. That's what keeps me sharp. His personal life is just as consistent. Jay and his wife Mavis have been married since 1980. They never had children, choosing instead a quiet partnership grounded in purpose. Mavis became deeply involved in women's rights work, serving on the board of the Feminist Majority Foundation. In 1998, the couple donated $100,000 to support women in Afghanistan, a contribution rarely mentioned because they never wanted credit. They continue to support education funds, trade programs, and museums quietly, without announcements or ceremonies. When asked about marriage, Jay simply says, "She's the one who taught me how to be quiet." Even in his 70s, Jay maintains the same discipline he lived with at 20, 4 hours of sleep, 16 hours of work. When a reporter asked if he was ever tired, he replied, "No, I'm doing what I love. If I stop, I'll rust like an engine that never runs." For Jay, rest was never the goal. Purpose was. But even engines built to run forever can face fire. In November 2022, while repairing a 1907 white steam car, a spark ignited beneath the hood. In seconds, flames rose into Jay's face and across his hands and chest. He was rushed to the Grossman Burn Center with second- and third-degree burns. Photos of his bandaged face spread across the news. Jay said only 6 words, "My face was on fire." That's it. There was no dramatization, no self-pity, only truth. Doctors said his recovery was due to 2 things: his physical strength and his will. Just 2 months later, in January 2023, Jay crashed a vintage motorcycle when a wire stretched across a road caught his front wheel. He fractured his collarbone and broke 2 ribs. When the hospital urged him to rest, he shook his head. "I cracked a few parts," he said, but the laughter's still intact. He returned to the stage days later. This is who Jay Leno has always been. Not the celebrity, not the star, but the craftsman who refuses to stop working. The man who built his life from grit and routine, and who chooses to live not in the spotlight, but in the quiet hum of engines and the warmth of shared laughter. By mid-2022, when reporters asked about his injuries, Jay shrugged them off the same way he had brushed off every hard moment in his life. "I grew up in a garage," he said. "Accidents are normal." And then he went back to work. Within 3 weeks of suffering severe burns, he stepped onto a Las Vegas stage before more than 2,000 people, smiling, joking, performing, never once mentioning that half his face had just undergone reconstructive surgery. His audience couldn't tell. That was the point. Jay never wanted sympathy. He wanted to keep moving. Early in 2024, while filming a segment for a car test in Pennsylvania, Jay slipped and fell down an 18-meter slope, fracturing his wrist and bruising his face again. When asked about it later, he simply said, "Feeling good. As long as I can work, I'm alive." It was said with no shock, no drama, just acceptance. Those who were with him during the fall remember that the first thing Jay asked was not for medical help, but, "Is the car okay?" Even injury could not break the bond between the man and the machines that had shaped his life. But that same year brought something far heavier than broken bones. In 2024, court records quietly revealed that Jay's wife, Mavis, was diagnosed with advanced memory loss. For the first time in their 40-plus years of marriage, Jay had to speak publicly about something deeply personal. On April 1st, the court granted him legal guardianship over her medical and financial care. In his filing, he wrote that his only wish was to make sure she would always be protected, with love and absolute safety. When reporters asked about the decision afterward, he responded softly, "Love is taking care of each other when one of you can't." Some days, Mavis no longer recognized her husband. Still, he brought her to small events, walks, and routine outings, believing that familiarity, not sorrow, would help her feel anchored. By summer, Jay appeared once again in a new episode of Jay Leno's Garage, wearing his leather jacket and that same familiar smile. He introduced a restored vintage electric car with the same enthusiasm he had shown decades earlier. When the media revisited his accidents, his losses, and his challenges, Jay gave the most Jay Leno answer possible. "I don't think I've had trouble. I just fix cars, and sometimes the cars fight back." It was humor shaped by resilience. Doctors say his healing was remarkable. His skin mended, his bones recovered, and his voice never lost its steadiness. But something deeper had changed. After years where life seemed to strike all at once, Jay didn't slow down. He simply continued forward with even greater clarity. In 2025, Jay Leno turned 75. After 2 years of recovery, upheaval, and quiet emotional battles, he returned to the only rhythm he has ever known. His tour began in February in Florida and stretched across the year through Connecticut, New Jersey, Nevada, and California, nearly 170 performances in total. The venues remained full. Some people came to laugh. Others came simply to see him, the man who kept going when life gave him every reason to stop. Because Jay Leno has never been driven by fame, he has been driven by purpose. And even when time tried to move past him, he refused to let go of the parts of life that gave him meaning. Jay walked onto every stage the same way he always had. No dramatic spotlight. No emotional buildup, no theatrical entrance. Just a simple adjustment of the microphone and a quiet, familiar joke. "I just finished fixing a car and it didn't blow up." That was Jay Leno. No performance. No pretense. Just a working man who happened to be famous. Jay Leno's garage continued to thrive, especially online. His 2025 episodes shifted toward electric vehicles and emerging technology. While testing the Cadillac Celestiq, Jay smiled and said, "I don't buy them all. I just keep the ones that make me happy." His voice carried the same steady warmth, humor layered with sincerity. Another episode featured the Ford GT Hybrid, filmed on the Burbank track. He spoke about the handling, throttle feel, and engine tone with precise detail, not selling, not bragging, simply sharing knowledge. Beneath the video, thousands of comments said the same thing. He's not old. He's just continuing. Despite everything he had survived, Jay's health remained astonishing. He still slept 4 hours a night, woke up early, and refused caffeine. No alcohol, no sugar, no cigarettes. His doctor once joked, "He's the only patient I've ever had who has never taken a day off." Jay turned it into a punchline on stage. Behind the joke, though, was the truth. He lived life like an engine that needed to stay running. Jay's personal wealth was estimated at around $450 million, with his car collection accounting for a portion of that value. Big Dog Garage became not only his workshop, but his sanctuary. He spent his days there with a small crew of mechanics, restoring cars carefully, methodically, the same way he had repaired engines in his youth. And when disaster struck Los Angeles in 2025 with massive wildfires, Jay drove his vintage fire truck into neighborhoods with volunteers, delivering supplies, not for publicity, but because work is how he shows love. He avoided awards, ceremonies, and red carpets. "I don't need to stand on a stage holding a trophy," he once said. "I like standing in a garage doorway watching smoke rise from the exhaust." That sentence summed him up completely. When speaking of his wife, his voice changed. Softer, slower, more fragile. "She's still got the fire," he said of Mavis. Then he paused, steadying himself with a smile before shifting the conversation back to cars. That pause said everything. Love was not spoken loudly. It was lived quietly. At the end of 2025, Jay appeared at a fundraiser for burn patients, a rare honorary event. His speech was short, focused only on gratitude. "They're the ones who helped me look at my face again and keep smiling," he said. No story, no spotlight. Just thanks. And still his routine never changed. Weekends for stand-up, early mornings in the garage, filming midweek, teaching young mechanics how to restore engines, encouraging them to take pride in work, not fame. After more than 50 years in show business, Jay Leno remained exactly who he had always been. Half of him belonged to the stage lights, timing, laughter, applause. The other half belonged to the hum of motors and the cool smell of steel. The two lives, once separate, had finally become one. This was Jay Leno's real legacy, not celebrity, not ratings, not fortune, but the quiet dignity of a man who never stopped working. If you're inspired by people who live their purpose with everything they have, like Jay Leno, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story we share.